In this video, I'd like to take a look at relative referencing and absolute referencing, and perhaps those strange dollar signs that you keep seeing in other people's formulas and functions. But to start off with, I'd like to just do a calculation here. So in this value, I want to multiply the cost of these items and the number that we've got in stock. So we start with equals, click onto the cost, which is B5, and multiply that by C5, and I'll press enter, and you'll see I've got the formula just popping up beside it, so you can actually see what the formula is in this cell. I want to copy this all the way down here. Now when we copy this down, let's just pull it down one. Can you see that the B5 in that original one is now B6 and the C5 is now C6? So this is called relative referencing. It means that the references will change depending on whether you're dragging this down or copying and pasting it somewhere else on the spreadsheet. The sort of programming in the background, if you like, is not saying in this first one B5 times C5. What it's actually saying is multiply 2 to the left of this active cell by 1 to the left. So actually we're actually just copying that piece of code. It cleverly converts it back to cell references for our benefit, so that we can actually see what it is we're multiplying. So I can now double click the fill handle, send that all the way down, and you'll see that in all of these cells we've got the reference moving up by one row. So B5 and C5, B6 and C6, and so on, all the way down to the bottom. So we call that relative referencing. And in fact, if I copied that, if I just do a Control C on that first one and put it over here somewhere and paste that in, you'll see that if I press F2, we're multiplying the 2 to the left. So it actually doesn't matter where you copy and paste, it will keep those references relative to that active cell exactly the same. Okay, so now what I want to do in this column is multiply that value, that 1683, by this 20% that's at the top here. Now of course, let's just do that. In fact, equals E1, that's the 20%, and we'll multiply that by the value that's in D5. Press enter and we get the correct answer. £336.60 is 20% of that figure. Now watch what happens when I drag that down. I'll drag that down one and I've got 0, and really we want 20% of this 4,928. The reason we haven't, I'll just press F2. Can you see that the D6 is okay? So it was D5 and that's moved down to D6, but the E1 is now E2. You can see it's moved down one, and if I sent that all the way down, we'd start getting some errors because we're starting to reference this column here where I've got these formulas, and we just want that to point to 20%. So if we look over here at these formulas that we've got, D5, D6, D7, D8, they're all correct because we want that to stay relative. But the E1 has moved to E2, E3, E4, which is giving us the wrong results or the errors. So let's just delete those out and redo this. Let's type equals and then click into E1. Now E1, we want to fix that or anchor it. We call it absolute referencing. We do that by putting dollar signs in front of the E and the 1, and rather than typing it in, there's a nice quick shortcut. Just press your F4 key on your keyboard and that puts your $2 in. So the $ in front of the E makes the E stay E wherever we copy and paste this, and the $ in front of the 1 makes the 1 stay 1 wherever we copy and paste it. So we've absolute referenced or fixed or anchored, whatever you'd like to call it, the E and the 1. Now let's multiply that by this value over here, D5. Now we want D5 to stay relative. We want that to become D6, D7, D8, but we want E1 to stay fixed on E1, so it's always pointing to that 20%. So now let's drag this down 1 and copy it. Can you see that we've still got E1, but it's times D6 this time? So we can send that all the way down and we get the correct results all the way down. Now if I change this 20% to say 25% and press enter, that changes all of those calculations. So this is a really handy feature to be aware of and use, because you can be much more efficient and dynamic in your spreadsheets. Now, as I said, we've put a $ in front of the E and a $ in front of the 1. So why do we need 2? That's because we can have one or the other or both. So let's give you an example of that. Let's go over to the next sheet here. Let's assume that I want to find 10% of this value here, but I also want to find 15% of it, 20% and 25%. So in other words, I want to put a formula in here that I can copy across to the right. Now when I copy across to the right, I want to move from 10% to 15% to 20 and 25. But when I copy this down, I also want to move these values down, D3, D4, D5. But when I copy to the right, I want to still point to column D. And when I pull this down, I still want to point to row 2. So I know this sounds complicated, but let's just have a look at this. Let's type equals, and I want to multiply that 10, or that 10%, by this figure over here. What we first of all want to do is press F4. Now that's absoluted the E and the 2, but I want to be able to drag this down, so I want the 2 to remain fixed. That's row 2, so that it always points to that 10%. When I copy this across to the right, I want the E to become F, then G, then H. So it's no good fixing this E, because I want it to become F, G and H. So what you do is press F4, and can you see that's taken one of the $ out, the one in front of the E. So now we've got a fixed 2, or an absoluted 2, which is what we want, so that when we drag this down and copy down, it remains on row 2. But when we copy this to the right, E will become F, then G, then H. Now let's multiply this by D3. Now when we copy down, we want D3 to become D4, D5, D6 and so on. But when we drag this to the right, we don't want D to change. We want D to remain fixed. So what we have to do is press F4, so we've now got an absoluted D and an absoluted 3. Press F4 again, and now we've got a relative D and an absoluted 3, but we don't want to stay on 3. we want 3 to become 4, 5, 6, 7, so that when we pull this down it's pointing to these, but when we copy across to the right we want to stay in column D. So what you do is press F4 once more, and that puts the dollar sign in front of the D. So what we've got is in E2 the column is relative, so the column will become E, F, G, H, but the 2 is absoluted, so we remain in that 10% when we copy it down. For the D3, the D is fixed or absoluted, so it will remain in column D when we copy it across to the right, but the 3 is relative, so the 3 will become D4, D5, D6. So let's press enter, and there it is there, E2 times D3. So let's see this in action. Let's pull that across to the right. Can you see that we've now got F2? So E2 has become F2 and D3 has remained D3. We've fixed the column. So let's pull that right across so you can see that the D has stayed there. We've got D3, D3, D3 and D3. But the E has become E, F, G and H. So now let's just start pulling this down. We'll just pull it down 1 to start with. So in pulling it down, the E2 has remained. So we've fixed the 2 so it stays on row 2, but D3 has become D4. So now we can copy this all the way down and we get our result. So the idea of having these dollar signs is so that you can just do your formula once and copy it down and copy it across, or copy it anywhere on the spreadsheet, and it will fix both of them if you've got the $2 signs, or it will fix or anchor just one of them. To anchor the column you have the dollar sign in front of the letter, and to anchor the row you have the dollar sign in front of the number. So hopefully that's given you some idea of how to use the dollar signs and absolute referencing and what relative referencing means. So the good thing here is that it makes you much more efficient and your spreadsheet very dynamic. This does take a bit of practice, so have a practice at it and just get used to what's happening when you're copying and pasting these formulas down or across or to other areas on your spreadsheet. If you like this video, please give me the thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss any future videos.